Hi everybody, welcome to the latest in a series of ISE webinars. Today we're going to be talking about on-campus marketing, what employers, what universities are doing to gear up for the next recruitment season, and also got the agency view as well. So my name is Steve Isherwood, I'm Chief Executive of the ISE and I'll be hosting today's webinar. For those of you that haven't done one of our webinars before, I'll just give you a little idea about how it works. Because there's so many of you actually logged into this, we've got over 300 people registered to attend. We keep you all on mute, but you can ask questions. In fact, we really want you to ask questions. So within the platform that we're using, you'll find a questions blog. So please put your questions into there. I'll try and keep an eye on them as I'm kind of asking questions to our esteemed panelists, but it gets a little bit tricky. So I'll drop some questions in, but we will definitely leave time at the end. We'll leave a good quarter of an hour out of the session to go through any questions that you answered, and our panel are more than happy to answer anything that you throw at them. So please do that. For those of you that are members of the ISE, well, obviously you know all that we do, so welcome to our webinar. In response to the current crisis, we've opened up our webinars platform to everybody, so we haven't put it behind our paywall. So if you're not ISE members, welcome very much. Welcome to the ISE. Please engage with us as much as you can. You'll find a recording of all our webinars on our website. So if you want to go back over the content that we've covered today, or if you want to share that content with other people in your organisation, please do via our websites. That's enough for me. I think it's time we got stuck into the content of today's session. So what I'm going to do is get the panel to introduce themselves, who they are, their role, their organisation, just a little bit around kind of what they're working on at the moment. So Amelia, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi everyone. Lovely to meet you all and have this opportunity to chat to you. So I'm the employer on the panel. I work for Siemens and I manage early careers attraction, so recruitment marketing, employer branding, and campus activity. So at the moment, I'm, really rising to the challenge of how we can get things ready for the new campaign, now that everything's changed around us, and seeing it as a real opportunity to push those creative and innovative buttons.
Thank you very much, Amelia. Lizzie, would you like to go next?
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Lizzie Darlington and I'm the Director of LSE Careers. So I'm the careers representative here. It's lovely to be here. Previous to this, I've been a careers consultant at Oxford and Cambridge Uni, and I used to work in graduate recruitment and development at L'Oreal and Barclays Capital many moons ago. What have we been doing? Well, following a successful transition, I would say, onto online working in a virtual world, we really are trying to keep to our normal plans. So we're about to launch our summer programme where we're trialling new, obviously, virtual events with alumni and employers, and we're really excited to see what happens there. That'll be a 4-week programme, but we've really got our eye turned to the autumn term. So how can we help employers engage with our students? How can we make meaningful virtual engagements? And that's really what we've been focusing on, as we would be in a usual year. Thanks.
Thanks, Lizzie. Andrew, would you like to go next?
Great, thank you, Stephen, and thank you very much for having me. I've got to be polite about these things. So yes, Andrew Baird, Director of Consulting at Blackbridge Communications, which I think makes me the agency representative. We assist with early talent attraction for a range of organisations, including Aviva, Capital One, Babcock, Clifford Chance, Rolls-Royce, many other organisations. And what we're doing at the moment is we're trying to guide our clients through a situation in which there are a lot of variables and not a lot of certainty. So we're helping build strategies, often with contingency built into them, because things are, I think, liable to change by the hour sometimes. So we need to make sure that what we're doing is we're navigating a sensible path with the information we have, but also keeping options open in case things change. And that's the tricky thing that we're doing.
Fantastic, great, thank you all, and thank you all for sharing your time today. Amelia, can I go to you first with the first question? So we were chatting away just before we actually kick-started the webinar formally, and we were talking about the autumn and all the changes that everybody's trying to grapple with at the moment. So there are obviously going to be less physical opportunities to interact. So what channels do you think employers will be using to connect with students? I mean, what will you be doing at Siemens?
Sure, thanks for the question. A real variety of things. As I said, looking at it as an opportunity for new innovation, and we had been thinking about doing some innovative virtual events for some time, and now we've actually got that push to do it. So this has been a positive thing that's come out of the situation. So for the last 3 years, we've run an event called Sir William Siemens Challenge, which is a 48-hour engineering hackathon at Sheffield University, which has won a lot of awards for us, and also, most importantly, has recruited great engineering talent into Siemens. So we've seen this as an opportunity to sort of take a step back from that and create a virtual alternative. So we're starting from scratch. We're not sort of thinking, right, we've got something that works on campus. Let's sort of make it fit into a virtual strategy. We're seeing this as an opportunity to start from scratch. I think also because Siemens isn't such a big employer in terms of numbers compared to some of our competitors, we're seeing it as an opportunity to do more bespoke events, to stand out. We think that suits us more. We worry a bit, if I'm being honest, if we sign up to do many virtual careers fairs at Siemens, we'll get lost perhaps. So we think it suits us to do more individual events. So we will have like a flagship virtual event, which will be some kind of challenge, but then also very aware that it's important to have lots of opportunities now that we're not going onto campus for students to engage with us. So we'll be running, our recruitment team will be running weekly Q&A type sessions. And then additionally, our website, I think, is more important than ever, because I think we'll be relying more on pull factors rather than push factors through our attraction strategy. So by that I mean, I think we're likely to receive a lot of applications. Siemens and engineering is quite a stable sector. We don't struggle with the volume of applications. Obviously, like a lot of employers, we're focusing more on the right type of applications, and we want to support and equip all your students at universities as much as possible. So for me, I want to make sure that our website is full of great information, videos of tips and support, so that they can make the right choices. Yeah, so hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the things that we'll be doing.
Sure. So Andrew, what is that broadly what you're seeing from the rest of your clients? I mean, do you think employers are going to be targeting students directly through universities, through third parties, trying to pull as much as possible onto their own platforms, or is it going to be a mix of all three?
Hey, guess what? I'm going to cop out and say it's going to be a mix of all three. I think it always has been, and I think it will be going forward, and I think it will be after this particular era in history. I think universities, I'm sure Lizzie will contribute. They've got a great proposition in terms of data, in terms of access. The third parties, they're hearing what Amelia has to say about owning your own platform. There are still some third platforms out there that can help in terms of attraction, in terms of engagement. They've done the work. They've got the tech. They've got the audience. It's far cheaper to buy into that than to try to replicate it yourself. But the thing that really strikes me about what Amelia was saying, which I'm a big fan of, is facing up now to the challenge of differentiating yourself. Because the problem lots of graduate employers will have is, particularly those with quite low brand equity, people don't know them. I think Siemens is quite fortunate in this regard, because most people know who Siemens are, but those who aren't well known, how do they differentiate themselves? They don't have that push factor of going onto campus and saying, hey guys, stop, have a free water bottle, let me tell you about who we are. You've got to pull them in. It's a sad fact that whilst Zoom is really useful, one recruiter sitting in a spare bedroom talking about Zoom is pretty much like the next recruiter sitting in a spare bedroom talking about Zoom. And organisations have historically found it quite hard to communicate the cultural proposition in particular online. So I think what we're going to see, again, just absolutely confirming what Amelia said, is organisations having to be incredibly creative, thinking outside the proverbial box, apologies for the cliche, and finding a way of advertising and sharing their culture via online platforms, because it's harder to do that than it is when they're in your office or you're sitting talking to them on campus.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And I think for us at Siemens, we're just really worried that a lot of the students are going to get virtual fatigue as well. And I think one of our fears, just being very honest as an employer, is that, you know, we're going to create something which will probably be ready in November, but what if all of your students have done so many events that they're just not going to, you know, how can we stand out, as Andrew said? Are they going to be absolutely sick of dialing into virtual events? So how do we make sure that doesn't happen?
I think that's really,
that's going to be a real problem, particularly for, sorry, Liz.
Yeah, is that all right if I just pick up? I think that's really interesting, Amelia, and actually it's really good to hear you saying these sorts of things, because what our employer engagement team have been doing and what we've been concentrating on is really trying to think of creative ways to be able to help and drive meaningful engagements. And I think that's the piece that we're really focusing on. And there's so many ways to do that, and they don't have to be really resource intensive. You know, we can have a range of skills and professional skills that we're trying to develop in our students, and we know students want to develop, and we can set challenges with employers. You know, it can be fairly light touch, and there can be ways to do that, but to then get them to go away, work on something, come back. And I think some of those things are key in terms of the virtual environment. It doesn't just have to be in terms of, you know, our Zoom call or webinar today. And a thing that we really talk about with students, and we're working a lot with them about at the moment, is a strong narrative, right? We talk about every student having to have a strong narrative when they're speaking to an employer. We're taking that forward, and I think that fits with employers, it fits probably with the agencies piece, and it fits with career services at the moment. What is going to be our distinguishing feature? How are we going to make people stand out? How are we going to help our employers stand out with that student audience? Because Andrew's right, we do have the data, but it's about now creating those interactions that students are going to really want in this time, and that isn't just being on the screen all day, as you say.
I think a lot of organisations are going to have to go back to their desks and look at their EVP, look at their narrative, look at have they properly differentiated themselves in terms of the talent market. I think a lot of EVPs in the graduate market will have to change for a number of reasons. Firstly, to cope with the virtual environment. Secondly, to cope with how their organisations may or may not have behaved during COVID-19. And thirdly, Black Lives Matter. There's going to be lots of people looking at the story and the narrative that they take to market by necessity.
It's interesting you raised that, Andrew. We did a podcast, I think it's about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, and at that point we were talking about organisations that had responded well to COVID and those that hadn't, and how that was becoming really important in the way that EVPs, brand propositions, just played out. Is that something you all think is going to be a really strong factor as we sort of get more into recruitment season later in the year?
Yeah, absolutely. We're working really hard on candidate engagement at the moment and making sure that we keep in contact. A lot of seminars, particularly in the early days of COVID that I listened in on, talked around the importance of keeping in contact with the candidates that had been given offers really regularly. And I think the feedback really showed that even if you haven't got much to say, they want to hear from you and have that reassurance from you, and they want to be contacted by email. I think they're obviously feeling anxious. They hear that some employers may, hopefully not too many, have rescinded offers or have to make alternative arrangements. So they need that reassurance. And you're right, Andrew, what you said around reputation at the moment. Students will look at the companies that have sustained a good reputation throughout the COVID crisis, and the ones that haven't will potentially find that quite damaging and take quite a long time to recover. So at Siemens, we do work quite a lot on employee advocacy and social media, and we're making sure that we're creating lots of content that they will receive, which will be a differentiator amongst us and other engineering and tech alternatives.
I think it's raising a lot of interesting questions. There was a TA professional in the States a couple of weeks ago was saying that for the first time ever, when she's hiring young people, they're asking what the organizational policy is on exiting talent. And that's something I've never heard before. So part of the upfront proposition is, if you don't need me, what does that look like? What kind of process do I go through? So the candidate journey is extended to exit at the point of entry. So I think that's something else a lot of organizations will need to be thinking about.
Lizzie, can I just turn to you? We started talking about sort of, multiple platforms, third parties, employers' own websites. And one of the things that I'm slightly worried about, and I know that others share this concern as well, is that there's a danger that students, employers will spread across a multitude of different platforms. If we think of all the universities out there that, of course, will still be creating traffic to their own sites, all those third-party sites, and then employers, exactly as Amelia's been describing, putting traffic onto their own sites. Is there just not a danger we have this massive sprawl and nobody can find each other? We'll have little pockets of students, pockets of employers. So, I mean, the advantage of a careers fair in one place is actually you can get a whole bunch of students and employers into one building for a day. Kind of everybody knows they're there. Did you foresee that being a problem this autumn as everything does go virtual?
Yes, I do. I don't think there's getting away from that. I do think this is going to be a challenge. And this is why I think actually conversations like the ones we're having today, and that I know employers, organisations, institutions like ourselves have been having around collaboration is quite important. So there's various initiatives that possibly, employers will get together and decide to kind of come together and put things together so we can target things towards students that way. Universities are learning from each other all the time. And I think what we need to think about are the things that it's important that we can add some structure to. So as a university, we're thinking about the ways that we can, really structure our themed weeks, areas around different sectors, different sort of things, and that we can bring then employers into and really help, during those periods to say, look, this is when we're going to be doing this sort of work. And what we have is an understanding, I suppose, even though it's hard to know at the moment, of what the students' timetables are going to look like. Amelia mentioned this, and she mentioned fatigue. And I think this is a real concern. I know we've probably all had back-to-back meetings of 6 hours. And at the end of that, you feel like, I don't want to go into another, recruitment event or whatever it might be in terms of that. So I think we do need to think about trying to have some level of coordination, so continue these conversations and understandings, help students by structuring our plans so that they know clearly when things are going to be throughout the term. And Amelia mentioned, will November be too late? I absolutely hope not. I hope what this would encourage employers to do, is spread a little bit more. One of our kind of core dangers is that we always have this busy 3-4 weeks at the beginning of autumn term. Now, what would be great is actually if we could have, I suppose, that engagement over a slightly longer period of time, and it would be better, hopefully, a better engagement. Hopefully, there are some things that I think we need to think about. Apart from the third-party suppliers, you've also got student societies in there, and that's something that we kind of not talked about yet. But they will be doing their own things as well. And I think your institutions, so universities, we want to have, and we have close relationships with our student societies, so we understand what they're doing with employers as well at the same time, because that just adds another element. But there are opportunities, so I think we've got to think about some of the opportunities that the tech provides us with. We've found some really strong platforms in terms of virtual fairs. So if we decide to go and run some of them, there is much better data collection, there's much better opportunities to continue those chats, have engagement over time, and be able to see actually this student came, spoke to us, and this is what's happened, and we've either hired them or we haven't. And so I think there are some great things that we can look at. And we were talking before we came on about things like pre-arrival resources. Lots of universities have either been doing this or are working on this. This allows us opportunities to speak to students before they even arrive and start to get them thinking about their career planning, and then helps them direct them towards various employers or sectors by the time, you know, they're starting to get here. One last thing I'd just like to mention, I think it's really important for us all to remember, is that these students will have been out of education, well, traditional education, for up to like 6 months. So we have a real piece in guidance and education. So it's really good to hear that employers are creating resources and these sorts of things that are going to continue to help them, because I think that's going to be a core piece for all of us.
And
Yeah,
I saw you nodding your head to that.
Yes, I think Amelia has something to contribute as well. Do you?
I was just going to say, if that's okay, Lizzie, it would be good to sort of hear a bit more around your sort of predictions as to when the students are going to actually be looking for the roles when they go back to university, because I know traditionally, you know, they look pretty soon, but as you said, a lot of them haven't been at university for 6 months, and you know, they're coming back, you know, whether that's distance learning or whatever that might be. And I guess there's going to be this real pressure just to settle back into learning again in university life. Do you think that would affect the timing of when they will look for jobs?
I would actually say, you know, and I know I work at LSE, so they're very kind of career orientated. So that often is something that they engage quite early anyway. But we're still seeing engagement from our students. One thing I would like to point out is, you know, our career services have got more traction at the moment than we did at the same time last year. We've been tracking that, and they're talking about when our graduate employees going to open up their graduate programs. Is it going to be July like last year? You know, for some of them. So actually, I would say what we're hearing for some students and the engaged students is that actually, I think they will be engaging and they will be ready. And I think they're very used to these sorts of platforms already. As I said, we've been doing summer programs. I know other institutions have been running lots of these things, and they've been wanting to engage with employees during this period. I think though there is a piece around, as I said, you know, for these, you know, new first years coming in, you know, actually maybe giving a little bit more time, even just from a terms of helping them understand where they are in their career planning. You know, sometimes I think they bolt out of the door, you know, in first years of being asked to sign up for Insight Weeks and all of these things, which offer really great things. But this gives us the opportunity to give these work experiences in micro virtual ways. And this is, I guess, what I was talking about before, and throughout the year in a way. And so I think that there's some real benefits in that if we can harness it.
Yeah, you don't need to choose quite so quickly, do you? It's a bigger salad bar for the people coming in, isn't it? That's got to be good for making the right decision, matching people to the right roles. I was nodding earlier because I think that the question of the sprawl is an interesting one. That's not my biggest concern, and I know that and somebody told me the other day that like 60% of millennials are on 6 different platforms or more every week. And Google is a great thing, but it is, as both of you have said, it's the fatigue. It's the fatigue based on how many of these things do you have to do if they're done individually, and you know how much you're going to understand the different proposition represented by the different employers. That's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. One of the questions we had already actually was to all of you, and I think you've touched on this anyway, was actually that thing around student fatigue and platforms, and also making the point of course, the students come back, there's a lot of their education experience is going to be driven virtually. It's not just the careers and personal landscape that's going to be virtual. They're going to be being taught virtually. So actually that's a lot of screen time, and I think we're all suffering probably from a bit of an overdose of screen time at the moment. So I think it's a really good point, is actually, you know, how a student's going to feel and how much time they're going to have to engage with other stuff.
I think that's really important. We're doing a lot of work in this at the moment at the university in terms of how that looks, and what we're talking a lot about is this community. You know, there's going to be no Freshers Week in the same way that Freshers Week, you know, has operated in the past. So how do students start to feel, I guess, some sort of, you know, kinship with their peers on the courses? And there's lots of work going into how, you know, how can you do this via these sorts of platforms? So I think employers continuing to think about that is good as well, and us helping you to develop some of these things with students, so that it isn't quick decisions, it's more of an ongoing kind of engagement. But that, again, I do think this is where students like to come away with something that they feel is really useful. We've known that for ages, and that's why there's been these employers skills seminars. And I think trying to think of those nice, creative, but hopefully not high cost, because we know everyone's in low budget, everyone's struggling with budget at the moment, but ways that students can do something which is real world and feel like, great, I've ticked off that skill and I've seen how they use it in Siemens, or I see how they use it, in an international development consultancy, will be really key, and it gets them away from the screen. I know I love the days when I've got less meetings in my diary, so if we can try and create these things for them to go away, maybe work with students, it might have to be in another sort of bubble or career group, but that would be really good. So I think we should try and encourage those sorts of things.
Now, you've mentioned the money word there, Lizzie. I think there's an undertow to this, isn't there, which is that, I mean, institution, finances, you've got real challenges with dropping international students, with the potential for people deferring their offers, and all the employers I talk to also are talking about, in times of economic uncertainty, we are in a recession, budgets are tight. Is that something that you're having to deal with, Lizzie?
It absolutely is. Thanks for that, Stephen. Yeah, financial pressures are obviously cool for everybody at the moment. And there's just so much uncertainty around this. So, we're not going to get the answers at the end of this call, definitely not. I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to think of, as I said, these ways that we can really help students, which might not be, we know that employers have less money to spend and their recruitment budgets are down. So we're trying to think of how we can reduce our costs with some of the kind of core events that we would have been running, or usually running. We're trying to, as I said, up the meaningful interactions, the things that we've always offered, at a no-fee basis. We want to think about how we engage with SMEs if they are able to still recruit, if they have numbers, how we can give them a profile and some sort of way, as I said, and some of the things I've talked about. So we've recently done something with Emphasis, actually a coding challenge, just an example of something that the students got so much from, and these are the sort of things we would want to be continuing to do. I think for us, it's all about understanding the student body. So we know what LSE students can offer. We've got lots of data on our students, so we collect career registration data, which tells you where they are in their career planning. We know their interests, the sector interests, all of these sorts of points. But we can really use that in a meaningful way now to be able to say to students, you're at this sort of stage in your career planning, you're ready to either get going with it, or actually you want to think more about, a range of different experiences. And we're really going to be using those sorts of methods to target students and tailor them more. And that's how we think we can help employers as well. Because as Amelia said earlier, I don't think numbers are the issue. Often for organisations like yourself, it's about getting the right sort of students. We want to think about ways, initiatives. We've got strong diversity and inclusion initiatives, and I think they're going to be really important this year and ongoing. I think these are good ways to be able to help our students who we know are most in need at LSE at the moment to find meaningful work experience. So we want to use these sorts of things because we know it's had traction in the past with our students. I think we want to strip back. I'm going to be honest, we can't do as much as we usually do, and we shouldn't be. And that's why I would rather, and I'm encouraging the team to work creatively with employers to think about things, programs, initiatives we can run. But if we have to do less of them, we'll do less of them. We've already said that students are going to be bombarded. So let's do less. Let's increase some flexibility into our programs so that if we get to November, December and we see change, we can maybe introduce something a bit, be agile, we can move with that. Because I think that's key, and that's going to be important for careers services, I imagine, everywhere. Interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Liz. Thank you for your feedback. Yeah, I think the whole thing about being agile and flexible is really important, because normally at this stage of the year, I've kind of committed to all my budget and I know exactly what I'm doing throughout each week of the autumn term. But I don't want to do that this year. I want to respond to the market and to the challenges you have at you know, your universities and the students, and I want to sort of get feedback as I go along. So you know, I want to try some virtual frequent engagement events so people have the chance to interact with us. But if they don't work, I want to have the ability to change them, because at the end of the day we want to offer as much support as we can to the students and the universities. So that's what I'd say about my attitude to attraction and how that would have changed from this time last year.
I think that's interesting. It's like what I was trying to explain earlier. There's a lot about contingency in planning from an employer point of view, because we just don't know. We need to make sure that things like, for example, content that's developed for online can be used offline, should that eventuality present itself. But the conversation started with the conversation, we're talking about money. What we haven't talked about is employer money or employer budgets. And one of the conversations that I keep having is people talking about the amount of money recruiters can save by shifting away from the face-to-face campus marketing. And in many cases, you know, it's literally hundreds of thousands of pounds. That you're not employing a great gaggle of people to lug thumping great presentation stands and merchandise around the country. You're not investing in, you know, all the evening events where people may or may not turn up, drink some white wine, then go home at 10 o'clock. That's not happening. And I think that's generally a good thing. It's a good thing for budgets. It also brings us on to something else that we were discussing earlier, which is, even though the pandemic is a terrible thing, there are lots of good outcomes from it, particularly in this area. I had a client yesterday who said to me, never let a good crisis pass you by. So there are opportunities that come with situations like this. And I think certainly there's something about return on investment. There's definitely something about shift to virtual platforms, what it means for accessibility and social mobility and D&I. It's infinitely better for people trying to recruit more inclusively than it has been previously. And the technology is there to make it quite cost effective and comparatively easy.
Yeah, I think
Andrew, what innovations? Sorry, go on, Amelia.
I was just going to say, it's just really interesting what you talked about with inclusion, because you know, we've targeted various different universities, you know, depending on the types of engineering students at those universities, and we've looked at D&I targets like gender to make those decisions. Obviously, in engineering, gender is a big thing. But as you said, I do think that from an employer perspective, it is an opportunity to be more inclusive, which is exciting. And the other point you raised around return on investment,
There are dangers.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you take, you know, an innovative engagement event to a high footfall area on campus, and, you know, give out something like coffee, it's so much harder you spend a lot of money on that type of event, and it is very hard to measure. So as you said, there would be a real opportunity to have much more control on measuring.
Yeah, and that the virtual alternative to that event on campus is probably more likely, depending on how it's timed and how available it is, to attract people who have accessibility problems, people who are scared of going to that kind of thing because they don't think it's for them. They'll go to a virtual event, but they won't go to a face-to-face event. And people who are carers, or people who are holding down full-time jobs, for example. There are some definite upticks in terms of moving to the virtual world.
Absolutely agree. I absolutely agree with some of those things. And I think it's that thing of, look, this is an amazing time for us, I suppose, and if we're happy to go with it, but to trial these things and to see what sticks, see what works really well, see what works well from the student side, what's working for you from the employer side, what's working from the supplier side, and get rid of the things that don't. And I think we need to give ourselves a bit of I don't know, a free pass that some things might not work, but if we're willing to give it a go and give it a trial, then then that's great, but we can drop it the following year. You know, I would hope though that we go back to a blended approach. You know, I for one love a bit of face-to-face interaction, and I think employers like face-to-face interaction when it's possible and when it's viable to do so. So we would want to create what we can for this, to create a really safe and really hopefully wonderful platform to be able to help students to engage, but with a view that for following year, you know, we keep what's great, but we also then have the events that we can be a bit more, you know, face to face and get that engagement again. Because at the end of the day, students do want to see what their office is going to look like. They want to see the people.
One of our clients is very much concentrating on the idea of shifting the face to face down the tunnel. So the face to face isn't the initial, here we are, come and work for us, we're great. You go through via social and online channels, the filtering, the moving people down the funnel. And it's almost just like pre-offer stage. You're saying to the qualified candidates, now come on in a socially distanced way and meet us. So the face-to-face will still be part of the candidate experience, just maybe not as early as it has been previously.
Yeah, and I think you've picked up on some key points, Andrew and Lizzie, around, you know, people, you know, want to see things like the physical environment now that they can't come and visit us. So it's a bit difficult at the moment at Siemens going to film empty offices and go to out to some of our sites and get access to them. But that's just something, you know, that we're trying to address, to give the students as much information as possible, because you know, just being very honest, we run so many focus groups of recent graduates that admit that they didn't really know who Siemens were, they didn't know, you know, and what we do, what job they were applying to, didn't really understand the job description, and then they're an employee at Siemens, and we obviously all know that that causes problems, this whole perception versus reality, and that's what I've been trying to address for the last couple of years in our recruitment marketing campaigns. And I know a lot of employers on the call will be thinking the same. You know, it's just such a massive challenge trying to get your target audience to actually understand who you are and why they should come and work for you.
And also, when you're in lockdown, a lot of the content generation tends to be user generated, and that is famously awful. UGC in our world is not always particularly good. It all kind of morphs into the same thing. So I think when you're under very restricted circumstances in terms of content generation, you do need to spend some time and some care making sure you are differentiating yourself, and you are getting the right messages across, rather than just, you know, having another parade of smiley talking heads that don't really do anything for you. That's my bet noir. Thought I'd get that one out.
Very good. It's funny, I'm just going back a sec. I won't take us off on another tangent, but you were all talking quite a bit about D&I. The people listening to this, if you go on to our webinar sort of library history, you'll find we did one last week on focused mostly on social mobility, but it's around this issue of actually what this crisis means for candidates with everything moving online, the pros and cons, because there also are some concerns that people have about groups accessing that kind of accessing those tools. But I'll hesitate just going all down that road, because it'll take us off on a tangent from a couple of other things I wanted to cover just before we went back onto the questions. Andrew, you started talking about innovations. If you get your crystal ball out, can you see, you know, some more innovation being driven by this particular crisis, and do you see any of that sticking in the long term?
Yes. So I think a lot of the innovations that are going to take hold are the ones we've had already. It's going to expedite the uptake of those innovations. And I think, you know, you don't have to go far to see really interesting stories around virtual internships, for example, which I think is what Lizzie was talking about earlier. The high quality bespoke employer owned careers events, I think that's going to be a big innovation. And development of extremely portable content, I think that's going to be important for recruiters as well. But what might really stick for the long term, there's a couple of things, two trends I think we'll all be part of. What COVID-19 has done is it's expedited the move away from printed assets, some printed brochures and leaflets and stands and the dreaded merch. Yeah, there's a lot less merch going on, a lot more virtual. And that has been prompted, or that's been expedited by COVID-19. but that was happening anyway due to employer interests and student concerns about environmental sustainability. So that's going to stay with us. And at the moment, environmental sustainability isn't the focus of many conversations. It's kind of third on the agenda, if you will, behind COVID and behind BLM, but it will come back to number one. So I think that move to virtual away from print and substantial merchandise will happen. And interestingly, at Blackbridge, we've been working with Clifford Chance to develop something called the Sustainable Recruitment Alliance, which is open to all early talent recruiters, which is going to be a pledge for people to turn up, put their name against it, and commit to having a more environmentally sensible approach to their campus marketing. That's one. That was almost an advert, but not quite. But two, the other thing I'd mention.
Well, we support that initiative. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, I know you are.
It's a really good initiative. So,
it might be okay to mention.
Happy for you to plug away with that one.
But the other thing is, I don't know whether it's an innovation, but the line that keeps coming back to me is that graduate recruiters will spend less time talking on campus and more time listening on social. That's my soundbite. So that any residual idea that graduate recruitment is about turning up and talking to people face to face, yeah, that'll still happen as part of a blended solution. But I think increasingly the graduate recruiters will be turning to social, and their jobs will be less about going to campus and talking, and more about going onto Insta, going onto LinkedIn, going onto Facebook groups especially. I'm told, and having insightful, inspirational conversations with people. So I think one of the key competence in terms of graduate recruitment is going to be community management, community engagement, and that's not going to go away.
I agree with a lot of those points. I think that sounds really, really interesting. Andrew, for us, I was mentioning this just before we came onto the call, we've got a whole part of our strategy, which is global reach. We're an international university, we've got over 70% international students. This has been brilliant in terms of keeping some of those things. We've been able to get out to some of our global employers much more easily. We run an event, actually a partnership with Imperial in Cambridge and some US universities, which is an Asia careers event, which we'd usually be going out to Asia to run in August. We're going to be doing, an online virtual platform, but we've been able to still engage with these amazing employers and alumni who are out, in all of these places. We run something called International Organisations Day, where we usually get organisations like the World Bank, UNDP, all of these organisations coming to LSE. Now, again, we're going to be running this virtually this year. We run it in our autumn term, but we've been hearing from the employers, well, this is great. We, instead of just having some of our, high profile HR recruiters come, we can have some of our people in the field speaking to people and doing some of these sorts of things where they can really see what the job is like and hear about it, as long as obviously the connections are okay. But, some of those things are great, and it's opened it up. And I think that's been wonderful. I'm sure that will stick as well for universities and employers.
And there's another corollary with early talent recruitment, which is a lot of our clients are going to be moving more substantially to a home working model. So that idea that attraction of early talent having a geographic basis, as it always has had, that's going to loosen. I was talking to one of our clients a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, you know what, I always thought I had to recruit people from within a 30-mile radius of my head office. Not doing that anymore. If you're in Singapore, if you're in Sydney, if you're in Timbuktu, I'm fine with that now, in a way that he wasn't previously. So I think in terms of attraction and getting hold of candidates, maybe rather like you're experiencing with that, a lot of graduate employers will be looking further afield. Maybe that the international aspect will become more real to employers who don't necessarily need the majority of their talent on site. I suspect Siemens isn't one of them. An engineering organisation, you probably do need to have people in a place all together at a time, don't you?
Yes, and that's a challenge with the site-based work. But yeah, just interesting listening to your conversation, and I think there's a real opportunity for talent acquisition teams, you know, as you said, to get more of their business stakeholders more involved. Now that we'll be doing things more virtually, I think we all know as employers, in the past, you know, you run these large-scale events at university, and then it's like, wow, we need, you know, 10 people to come along each day to support the event, and you're sort of, you know, struggling to get people to actually come, and that all feels quite old-fashioned now. You know, it's not doesn't fit with anyone's sustainability agenda, for example. So I think there'd be a better way to do things smarter and to really equip your stakeholders within the business to get close to the students, you know, through virtual channels and opportunities for that. We've seen a real shift in hiring manager behaviours as well within Siemens. You know, some people were quite afraid to do things virtually, and we've just asked them to try things like, instead of our face-to-face assessment centre at the end, you know, doing the virtual interviews, and some of them were doing those for the first time and think they're the best thing ever now. So there's a real opportunity, I think, for employers to sort of look at their internal setup as well and think, how can they better use that, you know, have a better setup to improve the attraction side of things.
Do you all think this will stick? I mean, I'm sort of trying to think forward to autumn 2021, because Lizzie, early on in this conversation, you mentioned actually you hope we do get back to some face-to-face stuff, and I'm sure we will. But I wonder how far we all think the pendulum will swing back to how it used to be, or will employers, you know, learn to do things differently? Those, as you know, we can talk about, you know, getting rid of the freebies, which would be a great thing, but also actually the cost reduction, both actual cash cost of moving people around the country, the opportunity cost of people time. I'd imagine actually once that's out of the budget, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get that back in. So I don't know, do any of you think where we might be sort of once we are properly out of this crisis?
I think we're right, and I think Lizzie first used this term when she talks about a blended approach. But Stephen, I think you've nailed it. I think the economic and the environmental arguments for not swinging back entirely are too substantial. I think that, you know, the budget can be more efficiently spent in new, largely virtual ways. And as I say, you know, increasingly over the next 2 or 3 years, not only the corporate pressure on environmental sustainability, but the student and the audience pressure on environmental sustainability will lead to a reallocation of how budgets get spent away from the wasteful stuff and onto the digital stuff.
Yeah, we've had our budget cut by about a third this year, so that's had a huge impact on spending. So, you know, there's been some real sort of big ticket items that have been cut out of the budget as well. You know, we're not just talking about shaving off a bit of money here and there. So we've had to sort of step away from some big initiatives. So now the real focus is on prioritising the spend and actually just thinking of the students, you know, what are the basics that they need to actually be able to you know, to contact us and to find out more about the roles and how can we best support them, what do they need. So, you know, it's basically having to cherry pick what are the essentials and what can we what are the nice to haves.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that going on, isn't there, across the board. I'm really interested with this one. I think absolutely some is going to stick. But I am interested in student behaviour. I'm really interested to see what happens in terms of whether we do start to see a bit of a kickback if there is a real lack of the face-to-face. So I don't know. I'm going to leave that as I don't know, and we'll have to wait and see. I think as long as we can have sensible blended approaches going forward, I think that will be the right approach. And I imagine it's for employers getting them to the point where they know pretty much this is the group that we're interested in focusing on, and then doing probably face-to-face work there. But I agree the sustainability side of things from a student perspective as well might make them start thinking, well, why should I have to travel? Why should they travel here? You know, so that will start to kick in. I agree, Andrew. So it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, blended, I will stick with.
I think
Well,
that's
it's
right.
interesting, the debate around. Sorry, go on, Andrew.
No, I was just going to say it'd be interesting if everybody goes virtual and then 1 or 2 organisations in 3 years' time decide to go back in person into campus and hoover up all the best talent. What might happen then? But I think that would be the exception.
But I was going to say, it's interesting, this debate that's sort of I won't say raging at the moment, but around you know, are students who are due to start university this year going to go, because you know they want the whole freshers experience, and that is a face-to-face experience. So if you look at that debate, that is evidence that students want face-to-face. They still want the campus student experience. They're not saying, oh, it's fine, I'll come along if I'm just going to be a virtual student. You know, there is still that underlying drive for that kind of experience, isn't there?
I think as soon as universities, sorry, Lizzie.
No, you go.
I was going to say, my understanding, I don't have any data for this, is as soon as universities open their campus doors a tiny bit, a load of people are going to pile in. Because you're right. I mean, let's not kid ourselves that students go to university to learn stuff. That's not what it's about. Essentially, it's about so many more things than that, which aren't easily satisfied on virtual platforms. So I think that's another reason why the blended approach will be important.
Yeah, absolutely agree. We are really seeing the pressure to think about how we can try and introduce a socially distanced smaller group working at LSE, and I can't speak for all the institutions, but that is because they're really getting strong steer from student groups that that's what they want. They don't want to come and sit in their rooms and just have a virtual experience. So I know our school's working really, really hard to try and think about how we do that, because it's easier to say than to do on a tight campus like LSE, but we're working hard to try and do it. I think face-to-face is still very important. It's just the ways that we're going to do that that's key to think through.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, it's prioritising those very targeted groups, isn't it? If when you do start doing face-to-face, if you're still mindful of budgets and sustainability, is just being very targeted with what you do.
I think that's one of the questions I was going to ask you. We've covered across. We've had a lot of questions through from our audience, and we've covered quite a few of those. Of just sort of, you know, as the conversation has progressed. But there are 1 or 2 that I think it's worth picking out. The first one actually is quite an operational one, and I think this is one for you, Lizzie. You talked a lot about international students and about how this is a great way to engage international students. Do you have to worry about time zones?
Yes, so that's one of the core things that we're really struggling with at the moment. And if your employers or institutions are thinking about it, it's something that we're still thinking about. So we've started to map out, we've got some sort of parameters documents of, okay, what are the best times of day if you're wanting to do a live event, I suppose, as it is with different groups across the globe. Obviously, they're going to be really fought after, and that will be especially the case. And I think it's important that employers think about this actually as well, in terms of if you're thinking of doing day events. You know, I'm sure there's going to be teaching going on during some of those periods and times. So if you're doing stuff along in those time periods, you need to probably think about those sorts of things. So no, it is not an easy thing that we're trying to do, but it does allow us to have a bit more flexibility in terms. What I think the virtual platform allows us to do is, you know, when you put on an event, you put in so much cost and money into booking the event, getting the catering, whatever it might be, making sure alumni come or employers come, and then you might get, you know, a small audience, and you're really embarrassed at that if that happens, and you tried and it hasn't worked for whatever reason. I think what this allows us to do is to sometimes do a little bit more in different, shorter like events maybe, but trial them at different periods and different times. And if the Q&A, for example, lots of people have been trialing these Q&As, if they work, great, you can roll them out really quite simply. I'm not saying it's, really easy, but so that's what we're going to try and do a bit more of. But no, yeah, we haven't found a magic wand for that, I'm afraid. It still is problematic.
That's one thing you can't change. Yeah, our time zones. Another question here, and this might be actually one for yourself, Andrew, but Amelia, you may have you as well. And it's a question that came from Emma, actually, and so she's got the unenvious task of launching a graduate scheme for the first time. So she's asking around actually, because not only dealing with the uncertainties we've got, but actually sort of doing something brand new for her organisation. So she's looking for actually a bit of advice, I think, on actually how you just start from scratch in an environment like this, and where do you go to? So actually you get that brand out there when it is going to be a very noisy, very sort of fragmented space as we've been talking about.
I'm quite happy to defer to Amelia on the mechanics of building a scheme, but in terms of getting the brand out there, I think a lot of it depends on how well known the rest of your organisation is. Are you working for an organisation with quite high brand equity that you can piggyback on? In many cases, that's what organisations do, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're not, and you're probably new to market, the biggest thing I would suggest in terms of how you're going to formulate this program is think about your point of difference within your market. Think about what you can offer, and it might be to do with culture, it might be to do with the development program, it might be to do with location, it might be to do with L&D, it might be to do with anything. Work out what your point of difference is within that market, and that's what you market. That's what your messaging is. That's what your key proposition is. So you develop a localized employer value proposition around what you have going for you that the guys aren't doing. That's my best bit of advice. And if you can tailor something in terms of the operational nature of the program that looks and feels new, looks and feels post-pandemic, takes into account a lot of the new emerging requirements from talent about home working, about not just where they're working, but when they're working, then I'd consider that too if I was doing it. I'd look to find as many points of difference as I could in terms of creating some space between my proposition and the propositions you'll be fighting against in the rest of the market. In terms of budget, I'm guessing if you're starting for the first time, you might not be working for a huge organization or an incredibly mature organization. Social, you've got to go with social. You might find that over time you can develop into greater use of third parties, building an even better careers site. But if your vacancy numbers are modest, then it's social all the way. And we're available for hire.
Anything you'd add to that, Amelia, from your experience? So you worked at you've not just worked at Siemens, of course. We know each other from EY. I think you were at KPMG before that, so a lot of experience. Anything that you'd add to what Andrew said?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, as you know, I'm on the attraction and branding side, so I don't have much operational experience. But one thing I would just say pretty objectively from working in big TA talent acquisition departments is to really listen to your target audience and to your key stakeholders. I'm a really analytic person, so for me personally, I would research the market, and as Andrew said, really be true to your EVP. And in terms of channels, yeah, absolutely, website and social all the way. But yeah, don't be afraid to do lots of listening and focus groups, and just to call people up, call up the universities and just say, I'm launching this grad scheme, can you give me some advice? And I think just by having some informal chats, you might be able to find that you get some fantastic feedback to help you define your strategy.
So what I was going to say, Amelia, which is Lizzie, which is yes, talk to your universities as well. Even if it's just sort of one on the doorstep, they have plenty of advice for you as well. Is that right, Lizzie?
Absolutely. I was just going to say that we speak to lots of employers of varying different sizes who reach out to our employer engagement team and us about what we can do, how can we target certain groups, which departments might be most useful, how do I get to speak to students, and we can help you with that. So please do, and speak to a range, because all institutions, though we're all pulling together, we're all slightly different and our student offer is slightly different. So to get a range and understand that would be really helpful.
Fantastic, thank you, and thank you to our panel. I think we should call time there because we've had an hour. The endless stream of Zoom calls goes on, so people are having to jump off to other calls or go and grab a spot of lunch. So a virtual round of applause, Lizzie, Andrew, and Amelia. Really thank you for your time. You gave us some great insights there. very much appreciated. Apologies if I didn't get to your question. We did have a whole lot of questions coming through. We've had well over 200 people on this webinar, so I couldn't get to you all, but hopefully we've touched on the issues that you were raising. A final reminder that we've been recording this webinar. It will go on to our platform probably by the end of today. So if you want to go back and recap any of the things we discussed, of course you can do that. But also please do share the webinar around and amongst your teams and share the knowledge. Thank you again for all your time, and a final thank you to our panel. Thank you very much for your insights today and sparing the time. And hopefully we will be meeting face to face again at some point later in the year. But for now, that's all from us. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.